What is America to me? A name, a map, the flag I see, a certain word, democracy. What is America to me? The house I live in, a plot of earth, the street, the grocer and the butcher, and the people that I meet, the children in the playground, the faces that I see, all races, all religions, that's America to me.
Well, I'm making this podcast after the fact, after I had made, what, 8 or 9 podcasts several months ago, enunciating and explicating and begging for the kind of action that could have and probably would have avoided this constitutional crisis. Indeed, some of the podcasts were entitled Constitutional Crisis. Actions that could have been taken, which I don't really want to enumerate here and now, but could have been taken by Joe Biden and by Merrick Garland, were not taken. And the probability was that if Trump won the election by fair means or foul, we would be in a continuing constitutional crisis and we would be the unwelcome audience for a dictatorial presidency.
On Monday, thousands of protesters took to the streets across the United States to speak out against Donald Trump and Elon Musk's moves to radically dismantle the federal government in what many have likened to a coup.
A country that for 250 years or thereabouts survived as a democratic state, that had a social welfare element to it, starting with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and all of this is being currently demolished. Every department of government is being investigated. It's being defunded, having sycophants of the president placed into positions to utterly destroy. And it's the Department of Education, it's the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Justice, as I said, Department of Education, the Consumer Protection Bureau, the Environmental Protection Bureau, and on and on. And the attacks on Social Security are going to come, and SSI, and CHIP, and SNAP, and all of the other things that keep poor people going in a country where 3 or 4 individuals have half the wealth of the country in their hands. So we now live in a presidential dictatorship supported by a robber baron oligarchy. Is this what America has become? The answer is yes. Could it have been avoided? Yes. What will be the outcome? Unknown. Unknown. 77 million morons voted for this lunatic.
Protests were held in all 50 state capitals and many other cities. Many of the protests were under the banner of Not My President's Day. At a protest in New York, Jay Walker of Rise and Resist spoke to Democracy Now!
We've got Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the Doge bros, the tech bros, ripping our government to shreds, ripping our Constitution to shreds, just ignoring the rule of law. And the American people have to stand up to it.
And there we have it. A free and fair election. Put this psychotic, this functional psychotic back into the White House, and he's just the front man of the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, and for those dark and nefarious forces that stand to gain from his presidency and from his continuing in office when his term of office expires. Because, watch it, folks, that is exactly what's going to happen.
A new study is projecting as many as 20 million people could lose Medicaid coverage under a Republican congressional bill to cut the Affordable Care Act's Medicaid expansion match rate. The American Hospital Association has harshly criticized the proposal, saying, quote, Medicaid provides health care to many of our most vulnerable populations, including pregnant women, children, the elderly, disabled, and many of our working class.
And starting to talk about the 77 million people who voted for Trump and voted in practical terms fascism, a bunch of Nazis. It is impossible to address the reasons why these people made it a completely irrational choice in conflict with their own self-interest, because these, presumably the vast majority, are ordinary people like me. They're not special interests. The dark money has nothing to do with this. It's 77 million freaking votes that caused this constitutional crisis in which we find ourselves today. And in addressing, I began to discuss the composite makeup of this vast amount, this incredible amount of people. And I described how I believed, and still do believe, that we're dealing with a psychiatric problem, a psychological problem, because these are not rational human beings. And what they're expressing is their own attempt to touch the power and authority and corruption of everything and everyone who they secretly admire due to their own feelings of inadequacy, whether they're real or imagined. And that's an important part of this story. How Trump comes to power a second time, a known felon, a sexual predator, a depraved human being, a functional psychotic. And along with him, all of those like-minded and corrupted human beings who are only interested in power and control. So what it comes down to is you get what you deserve, and what we deserve now is fascism. And as I watch the so-called conference between the United States, Trump, and Russia's Putin, what I see are two men prepared to divide up the world into spheres of influence. NATO is finished, or at least in its current state. It would have to be absolutely, completely reformed, with Europeans realizing that the US is now a fascist government with no interest in Europe. A concordat between Russia and the US leaves Europe in the cold. And we'll have to get back to that later.
In Washington, D.C., protesters gathered outside the U.S. Capitol and the White House.
The ends do not justify the means.
Venezuelan immigrants who won a temporary restraining order against the Trump administration blocking their transfer to Guantanamo were deported on Monday. In recent weeks, dozens of Venezuelans have been flown to the U.S. naval prison in Cuba as Trump claims to be targeting the worst of the worst. But new reports show many of the at least 150 Venezuelan immigrants now imprisoned at Guantanamo had never been convicted of violent crimes.